I want to welcome our presenter. I don't want to take up the evening talking myself. John Brehany is a PhD and also a licentiate in sacred theology. He's one of the ethicists at the National Catholic Bioethics Center, which is based here in Philadelphia. The NCBC was founded in 1972 to apply the church's moral tradition to developments in healthcare and the life sciences. I'm sure that you know Roe v. Wade came along in January of 1973, just a few months after the NCBC was founded, and the threats to the integrity of humanity, the threats to human life and the dignity of the human person have only become more complicated and grown since then, both at the beginning of life and increasingly at the end of life, as there are more and more threats. States in the United States that are passing laws that are allowing so-called physician-assisted suicide. So Dr. Brehany is, as I said, an ethicist with the NCBC. He joined their team in, I think it was 2015, sorry. And John leads the implementation of the NCBC's Catholic Identity and Ethics Review Program, which is a comprehensive, in-depth assessment program for Catholic healthcare based on the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare services. He also serves as a consultant on a range of clinical and institutional issues and teaches on the NCBC's certification program in healthcare ethics. From 2006 to 2014, he served as executive director and ethicist of the Catholic Medical Association, and from 2000 to 2006 was executive director of mission services and ethics for Mercy Medical Center in Sioux City, Iowa. He taught systematic and moral theology at Mount Angel Seminary in St. Benedict, Oregon, as well as courses in medical ethics at other institutions, including St. Louis University School of Medicine, Public Health, and the University of Illinois at Chicago's College of Medicine, and the University of Mary. Dr. Brehany received his PhD in healthcare ethics from St. Louis University, an STL from the John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family in Washington, D.C., an MA in philosophy from the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas, and his BA from the University of San Francisco. And on top of that, he's a wonderful family man and a great friend. So John, thank you so much again for agreeing to do this evening for us. We're up to about 309 people, so we'll probably have more people coming in along the way. First, a couple of disclaimers and housekeeping notes. As I said in the follow-up email inviting people and reminding people of this, John is a bioethicist. He's an ethicist. He's not a medical doctor. So we have to limit our conversation this evening to topics that have to do with the ethical use of the vaccines that are currently in production and will soon be offered for COVID-19. We can't tell you whether or not you should accept the vaccines. We can't tell you what the medical implications of them might be. Deal with any of the issues that go deeper than what the ethics are. So we'd encourage you to talk with your healthcare professionals or someone you trust in the medical field for those questions. And the legal questions we can't answer either. We don't know if these will be mandated. We do know that some private businesses like Ticketmaster supposedly are requiring people now to have proof of a COVID-19 vaccine, or will be, before they'll sell tickets to events. We don't know how deeply that might go with other organizations as well. But anyway, John, don't want to take any more of your time. Thank you again, and welcome.
Okay, and you turned it over to me, and so I'm just curious, can everybody see my PowerPoint display? Is that up now, Mark?
No, it's not, John.
Okay, then let me see here. All right, I'll do that. Excellent. Okay, so now you can see my PowerPoint display. I will be working through some slides just so you can keep the points that I'm going to make in some perspective. First of all, thank you very much for your presence tonight and your interest in this topic. The issue that I'll be discussing a lot, the issue of abortion-derived cell lines as they relate to vaccines, is a topic I've followed now for over 15 years with great interest, with great concern. So it's good to see a lot of people interested in this same topic. Thank you very much, Mark, for your good words about the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Of course, Mark, you worked there for several years, going back over 10 years ago. You can learn more about the National Catholic Bioethics Center at our website, ncbcenter.org. We have a special button on the home page. It's denoted COVID-19, where we have some special resources. And just today, the National Catholic Bioethics Center issued a statement about COVID-19 vaccines. I'm not going to read you that statement, although I think some of the points are reflected in my comments, but I encourage you to check out these resources. This is a very complex topic, and I'm going to try to do it justice in the time we have and in the format we have by covering 4 things. Let's see here, and I just need to get my, see if I can get my clicker to work. There we go. Okay, clicker's working. I'm going to try to cover 4 things. I will try to provide some answers, but I also want to provide some background, some perspective, and some resources so that you better understand the church's teachings, so that you might be able to explain it to other people, and so that you can enter into discernment yourself about what you're going to do, the decisions you will make for yourself and for your family. Second, I want to explain a key moral principle and some relevant church guidance, and then apply these to some of the vaccines for COVID-19 under development. Most of my focus is going to be on the issue of abortion or abortion-derived cell lines as these relate to vaccines, but I'll consider some other issues and principles as well. Third, beyond the issue of what we are permitted to do or not do, I'm going to suggest the need to go beyond moral minimums. And that's what I want to do with my prepared comments. I hope to get all that done inside of 30 minutes. So I'll try to keep an eye on the clock, and you can too. Finally, some of you provided questions in advance. I've looked through those, and I'll do my best to answer them. Some of them were on, similar themes and so on, so I might combine a bit, but we will try to get to all of those that I can answer, apart from legal questions or things like that. And if we have any time left, well, we'll see if we can put it to use, because I think this goes to 8:30. Okay, and there was a point about additional issues and questions. So let's talk about background, just to jump right into the controversy at hand, the connection between abortion and vaccines. And unfortunately, this is an issue that is decades old. To understand why, we have to briefly recall how many vaccines have been made for decades. Most vaccines are made by isolating a virus, weakening it or altering it in some way so that it's no longer dangerous, growing a sufficient supply of it, and then giving it to people in an immunization shot so that their body can develop a defense against the real thing or the wild virus. Now, to grow a supply of a weakened virus, it's necessary to grow it in a supply of living cells. For years, and even to this day, for many times the flu vaccine is made, scientists have used things like chick embryos. They've also used other animal cells, including monkey cells of some species. But scientists need living cells, and then this is how we get to the issue of abortion-derived cell lines. In the early 1950s, right here in Philadelphia, at the Wistar Institute, a scientist named Leonard Hayflick had an idea. Now, many of the cells that scientists were growing to produce vaccines, including the polio vaccine, carried impurities, including other viruses. And these were being passed on to the people who received the vaccines. And people who received the polio vaccine, a number of them were significantly affected. Hayflick decided to look for a supply of cells that had not been exposed to vaccines. He decided to get them from elective abortions. And he did this at hospitals in Philadelphia, and eventually he turned to some doctors in hospitals in Sweden. Hayflick took tissue from fetal remains, such as lung tissue, freed the cells from the connective tissue, and then got these cells to grow and then to divide exponentially in a lab. He did this multiple times, but the biggest cell line that he created is called WI38. He actually produced this in 1962, and it's still in use today in a number of vaccines. Later, he taught other scientists how to do this, and over the decades, they created a number of other cell lines, including as recently as 2015. Walvax-2 was created in China. Now, there are others. I mean, there are probably double or triple this number, but I only listed the ones that are most famous and that turn up in a number of the standard vaccines that we receive. Now, I want to note right at the start that these are not human embryonic stem cells. Rather, these are cells taken from tissue after abortion, isolated and grown independently. As I said, these abortion-derived cell lines are used in many vaccines, including those for children, in some other types of therapeutics, including something called monoclonal antibodies, and in a great deal of biotech research. Now, many people began wondering, and a lot of this came to light in the 1990s, whether using these vaccines is unethical because it appears to involve us in past acts of abortion, or at least in the efforts of those people who seek to benefit from abortion. So that's been a question for a long time. So now let's turn to some moral principle and reasoning. So right from the start, the church has confronted the challenge of living and working in a complex and morally compromised world. St. Paul responded to a controversy in his own time about eating meat obtained from pagan temples. He wrote about this in his letter to the Romans. Now, the church never was founded to go off into the desert in its entirety. Eventually, monks did, starting around the 300s. But the church has always lived in the world and is committed to living and transforming the world. So this has been an issue for a very long time. Here are some contemporary questions about cooperation that people often ask and that we get at the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Should we use scientific knowledge gained in unethical research, whether this was done by the Nazis or by someone else, by a doctor in America? Should we shop in or get our medicines from major pharmacies like Rite Aid and CVS? After all, these pharmacies distribute abortifacients and contraceptives and donate money to Planned Parenthood. Should we accept workplace health insurance when that insurance contains benefits for abortion, contraception, artificial reproduction, and even gender affirmation and surgeries? Now, the Catholic moral tradition over time developed an ethical resource in the form of the principle of legitimate cooperation. To summarize very briefly, the church teaches us that in discerning about whether we can be involved or to what degree we can be involved in somebody else's morally evil actions, we must avoid at least two things. Oops. See if I can get there we go. Okay, first, we must avoid sharing or affirming the morally evil intent or goal of the other person. This is called formal cooperation, although I'll keep the terminology to a minimum. We might do this in a verbal agreement. We might do this in signing an employment contract to do all these job responsibilities if those job responsibilities include doing something unethical. So first and foremost, we must not share or affirm anybody else's morally evil purpose. Second, we must not be closely or essentially involved in the immoral action. And that means we shouldn't be involved in such a way that it could not take place without our assistance. Now, if one avoids numbers 1 and 2, it may be permissible for a very serious or sufficient reason to be involved or connected in some distant way in someone's unethical action. Now, that's a very brief summary because the ethics of cooperation is kind of a world in itself in moral theology, but those are the essential terms. And that's been a principle that's been worked out almost over 500 years, the last 500 years. Okay, let's go on and talk about guidance from the church. Now, the church rarely gets involved or teaches about specific cases of cooperation because they can be so situation specific and so detailed. The church gives us moral guidance on many complex topics. For the most part, though, when it's our action, our intent, and so on at stake. However, given the importance of this issue, the church has addressed it 3 times over the last 15 years. And I'm going to go through this guidance very quickly. The first document I want to discuss is Dignitas Personae, issued by the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith in 2008. It's a document about artificial reproduction, other issues in biotechnology, but the church turned to this issue as well. Now, this is the most important teaching to pay attention to because the CDF has teaching authority in the church, and an instruction is a formal teaching document. Dignitas Personae carries much greater weight than a tweet or an interview comment from any given bishop or priest or even moral theologian. Dignitas Personae clearly recognized that creating these cell lines was wrong. Beyond the evil of abortion itself, it involved exploiting the bodies of human beings killed in abortion, which violates the respect due to the human body. The CDF warned scientists, Catholics in particular, but it wouldn't be right to anybody to cooperate with these cell lines in any way, even if they weren't involved in creating them or developing them. However, the CDF also noted, in light of the principles of cooperation and in light of a very serious need, that danger to the health of children could permit parents to use a vaccine which was developed using cell lines of illicit origin. But everyone has the duty to make known their disagreement and to ask that their healthcare system make other types of vaccines available. The next statements come from the Pontifical Academy for Life, also known as the PAV. V is for Vita in Latin. Now, the PAV is an advisory body. It does not have teaching authority. You might compare it to something like the National Academy of the Sciences, something that helps the government, but doesn't issue laws, or binding judicial decrees. The Pontifical Academy has issued 2 statements about this topic. Now, I put an asterisk by the first one in 2017 because it was a joint statement with 2 other Italian church organizations. The statement encouraged Catholics in Italy to get vaccinated to protect the vulnerable in society. The PAV also emphasized that the connection between current immunizations and past abortions, which which had used abortion-derived cell lines, was very remote. And those are the points they wanted to emphasize at that time. The Pontifical Academy for Life statement in 2005 was much more substantial, took the form of moral reflections. You can still find it online. Now, this statement also noted that any degree of cooperation or connection between a person accepting a vaccine today and the original abortion is very remote, very passive. It's not a question of any parent or child doing anything, really. So they're very passive in the relationship. Of course, years have gone by and so on. However, the statement emphasized that people should demand and use alternatives whenever possible, and also should protest the unjust situation that we are being put in as a result of these vaccines. Okay, let me turn now, taken together, this authoritative and advisory guidance is clear that the original action should not have been done. The CDF and the PAV in 2005 strongly encourage us to use alternatives whenever possible and to demand even more alternatives. However, both the authoritative and the advisory statements all agree that it is permissible, given lack of any intent or affirmation, and the wide separation between the end users and the responsible scientists. In the face of grave dangers to life and health, it is permissible to use these vaccines if necessary. At least the church has taught it's not forbidden. Okay, let me turn on now to COVID-19 vaccines and try to sort out some details. Now, there is a great amount of complexity in terms of the total number and the types of vaccines, their stages of development, and so on. There are hundreds of vaccines in development. There are between 50 and 60 in human trials. There are probably scores, if not hundreds, being studied with animals. I think about 13 are getting close to being finished. And I think if you've been following the news, you know that 3 have almost received approval. 2 are applying for approval in the United States over the next couple of weeks. 1 is actually approved in the United Kingdom. Now, in sorting through these issues, the National Catholic Bioethics Center has found the Charlotte Lozier Institute to be the single best resource for information on COVID-19 vaccines. You can view their resources at lozierinstitute.org. I put that up on the screen, LOZIER institute.org. And you'll find the resources I'm about to show you now. So what the Charlotte Lozier Institute has done is they've organized a chart. Now they haven't reviewed hundreds of vaccines. They've actually been able to study 38 to date. For each vaccine, they've looked at the different stages of development. These include design, I guess in early development, production or manufacture, and any post-manufacture testing. So you can see that on the left side of the screen. On the right side of the screen, they've color-coded whether abortion-derived cell lines have been used. If they put in green, then they have not been used in that stage of development. Red, they have been, and a split figure, if you will, a split square, shows that some have been used in some forms of testing and others have not. Now, what you can see if you read through the chart, and there's a lot of detail in the chart, but basically the vaccines break down into 3 sets, okay? There are some vaccines that use no abortion-derived cell lines, none at all, neither in design, nor manufacture, nor testing. Second, there are some that have a limited use. Some of these only in one stage, only in the final or confirmatory testing. And then there's another set in which there is significant usage in manufacture and often also in design and or testing. So let's take a look now. These are the 3 vaccines I mentioned earlier that are closest to being brought into the market, into use. Now, the one at the top is AstraZeneca Oxford, okay? And this one, they haven't quite It has not applied to be used yet, but it's very close. They have finished their last stage of trials. That's phase 3. Now, this vaccine is produced the traditional way by growing a supply of virus in cells. And so you can see on the right side, they developed it using HEK293 cells. They manufacture it using those cells, and they test it using those cells. The other 2 vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, now you've also heard these are very much in the news. In fact, they are applying for emergency use authorization next week and the week after here in the US. And the Pfizer vaccine has been approved, and they've started to use it in the United Kingdom. Now, these vaccines are brand new technology. They are RNA vaccines, and I'll try to talk about that in a couple of minutes. But what you can see is they don't use abortion-derived cell lines in the first 2 stages of development. Especially, they don't use it in manufacture. They did use HEK293 cells in some of the testing. Now, I will say there are about 5 vaccines that you can find in the chart that use no abortion-derived cell lines in any stage. However, they are not nearly this far along. Okay. Now, let me briefly apply the Church's guidance and the principle of cooperation to COVID-19 vaccines, just as it relates to the issue of abortion-derived cell lines. I'll come back to some other considerations in a second. Now, recalling the guidance that I just reviewed, it is not forbidden in principle to use vaccines that rely on or utilize abortion-derived cell lines, but we should use alternatives whenever possible. So if possible, the best ethical choice is a non-abortion-derived cell line vaccine. That's the best choice. The next best choice would be to pick one that has some limited use based on the principle of choosing the lesser evil in a matter of prudence. Okay, you can't, in a sense, choose to do moral evil, but when it's a matter of prudence, you can choose, and it's often better to do a lesser evil. And they certainly have omitted the need to grow a virus in human cells, and that's something. And finally, if absolutely necessary, if the only option is the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine or another one like it, one may use it, but under protest, and one should make one's objections known both to the supplier who is providing it and to the manufacturer. And you could do this with the Moderna or Pfizer vaccines as well. Okay, applying guidance and principles to other ethical considerations beyond abortion-derived cell lines. Because beyond that issue, which is significant, there are many other relevant considerations in deciding whether or when to be vaccinated against COVID-19. For example, one should have due regard for one's own health and should try to discern whether vaccination is the best strategy for protecting it, all things considered. So to accept or not accept a vaccine based on one's health, based on the risks, based on what is available, is a significant decision to make in and of itself. You definitely should put some thought into which vaccine to accept, and this may be an issue of importance to some people more than others. For example, and I put up on the screen a clip from a resource that Pfizer just provided to doctors in the United Kingdom. and they gave them some guidance about, their vaccine as it relates to pregnancy, breastfeeding, and fertility. Now, I just saw, and you'll have to give me 1 second, I unplugged my computer to move across the room. I'm getting a warning, so I better plug back in. So give me 1 second here to replug in my computer. Okay. Sorry about that. Live and learn. I haven't given a long presentation where I haven't been plugged in. So, Mark, am I back okay? And with that text up?
Yes, John, you are.
Okay, thank you. All right. So Pfizer is warning people that their vaccine should not be used by a woman who's pregnant. And in fact, a woman who receives it should wait at least 2 months to become pregnant after the second dose. Both these Moderna and Pfizer vaccines will take 2 doses. So they're warning that. They don't know if it will be excreted in breast milk, so they warn against that. And they don't know what its impact is, might be on fertility. There's a reason for that, but it's complex. So those are very serious considerations for any woman of childbearing age beyond the issue of abortion-derived cell lines. Okay. Now, some of the questions related to people protecting their own health. Maybe I don't want to take it. Maybe I'm willing to take the risk. Just based on basic ethics and based on the social teachings of the church, we should ask what effect our decisions or actions will have on the health of others. Family members, perhaps elderly family members, parents, fellow parishioners, people, in church, our neighbors, and so on. The thing about vaccination, it's a great thing, but vaccination does not only protect individuals, it can protect society. It can protect people who, because they're immunocompromised, sometimes they're getting cancer treatments, can't get vaccinated themselves. So we focus a great deal on the issue of abortion-derived cell lines, but we also have to ask how we can best serve the common good of our families, our communities, and so on. Finally, one may face pressures or even requirements based on one's line of work. For example, one may work in the healthcare field or the education field, or may travel for one's job. There may be a set of considerations legitimate in their rationale and scope that will have a bearing on whether one will discern whether to get vaccinated. So there are ethical issues, there are prudential issues, there are many considerations. Wrong way there, okay. Okay, the last thing I'd like to say, and I'm just about on time here, is that there is a need to go beyond moral minimums, in my opinion. The principle of cooperation and church guidance can teach us what is permissible or forbidden, but there's a lot more at stake in this issue than just vaccines or just avoiding unethical cooperation in evil. Over the years, I've seen scientists and activists, people citing vaccines and the use of abortion-derived cell lines to produce them to justify even more destructive research and even more ways of benefiting from abortion. We should not accept this argument or forget the moral evil that was involved. We should take this occasion to renew our determination, to protest, to demand alternatives, and to end this practice once and for all. Next, beyond the decisions we make for ourselves, and again, beyond even the issues of avoiding sin or an ethical cooperation, we Catholics have a task of witnessing to the gospel of life. We're supposed to build the kingdom of God and bring all things under the lordship of Jesus Christ. It takes a different level of moral witness to transform minds and hearts and ultimately to change science and medicine. We should be reflecting on how we can witness more effectively in our society, in our place of work, in the halls of government, so that we can truly build a culture of life. So that's the end of my prepared comments. And now I can turn to some of the prepared questions, and I won't have scripted comments for these, but I've looked through them a bit. So I'm going to paraphrase the questions. Hopefully the people who asked them will hear their question asked. So there was a set of questions. How do we know which vaccines are morally acceptable? What are the morally acceptable alternatives Catholics should pursue? And so on. Well, I hope by the end of the presentation, you have a much better sense of which ones are permissible for use, which ones are preferable for use, and what should go into a decision about whether to use them. So hopefully I got that answered okay. Now, there were several questions about the use of the HEK293 cell line and its use in the testing of vaccines, and also its use in other vaccines. And there was actually another question about, do vaccines for other diseases use the HEK293 cell line? So a couple of things here. HEK293, HEK means human embryonic kidney, and I can't remember where the 293 comes from. That was created around 1972, and that has become a major part of biomedical research. Sometimes when I talk about this, I tell people, you know, sort of how the Windows operating system works. You know, almost every computer uses it. Certainly Apple has a share, but you know, the Windows is the most common thing. HEK293 in biomedical research is almost the equivalent of the Windows operating system. It's ubiquitous. It's been used for decades. It's part of basic research, advanced research. It's very hard to avoid. It's become a part of researching many other medicines and so on. So that's the first thing. Is it used? It was used in testing for Pfizer, for the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, and I think a few others. It is used in some vaccines for some other diseases. Now, the single best place that I've found online to get a list of where some of these abortion-derived cell lines are used in vaccines and where there are alternatives is on the website of the Children of God for Life. That's COG, Children of God, COG for Life, all spelled out. And if you look at a tab marked vaccines, there's a drop-down menu and there's a vaccine chart. So all the childhood vaccines, vaccines for other things like rabies, shingles, things like that. Debbie Vanedge, who runs that site and is a friend, has really tracked down which cell lines are in which vaccines. And if you look through that list, you'll see HEK293 not in the majority, but certainly in a number of them, WI38, MRC5 are in many, many more, as is something called a PRC6. So yeah, this is, to me, it's an interesting issue when you consider HEK293 as used in part in the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Someone might say, well, I'm going to avoid that because I want to stay far removed, from that moral failing. And I want to stay far removed from the people who are justifying it and trying to extend it. To be consistent, you might find that HEK293 was used in many other therapeutics, some of which you may rely on. Okay, so that's a response to the question about HEK293. Someone asked about the elderly. This person has elderly parents living, in assisted living. Their parents haven't even thought about this yet. So what about these vaccines for the most vulnerable? And well, I would say people in assisted living facilities, the elderly in group living situations are among the first who are supposed to get this vaccine, right up there with healthcare workers and so on. As far as I know, it could be one of the best things that we could have to preserve their lives, and maybe equally as important, to get their lives back to normal. Most of these people, my own mother is in a skilled nursing facility. I mean, they've been locked down, of course, all through the spring and most of the summer, and they're re-locked down now, and they're kept in their rooms. So there's a lot, certainly there's been a lot of death and a lot of suffering because of this pandemic. And as far as I know, and I know there were questions about safety, maybe I should take this up very briefly now. How safe are these vaccines? Well, I would say the experts are addressing that using, I guess, the best, using public standards of safety at this time. Now, I listen to and read a lot of different things. I listen to podcasts, including one done by the Journal of the American Medical Association. I listen to infectious disease experts. I actually listen to a podcast of the Catholic Medical Association. And what I'm finding is most of the medical professionals are saying very similar things about the severity of this pandemic and about the vaccines, at least as relates to safety and efficacy. When the scientists say they're safe, they mean what's their theoretical safety, and they look at how many adverse events there are and things like that. What's their theoretical safety compared to the danger of getting the virus, the disease, and so on. So when they say they're safe, they don't mean that there won't be any adverse reactions. There are some, they tend to be short-term and manageable, but unpleasant. There may be more, but they would say compare it to the real issues we're facing. I think we're up to almost 3,000 deaths a day right now, where we have over 100,000 people a day hospitalized in America. Anyway, the issue of safety, there's no such thing as absolute safety or absolutely no risk. But what they have worked on, and I suppose we have to trust them just like we trust the airline pilots, who used to take us from one city to a next. We trust them because they're qualified, they're committed to their vocation and to the public good, and they have standards. So anyway, I hope, if one's elderly parents are offered the vaccine, they can ethically discern too, based on everything I said. But I think the vaccine could be a great help for them. So I did get, and I referred to this a little earlier, a couple people who said, why should we even get the vaccine? Or, I think I'd just rather get the disease myself and skip the vaccine. And there's a lot of, there's so much information and misinformation out there, I would say, about the severity of this disease. Again, I listened to those podcasts of secular docs and pretty good Catholic docs. They all seem to be saying the same thing. This is a very serious disease. It causes great morbidity, which means sickness. The ICUs are full, and people stay in the ICUs 3 times longer than normal. And there's a lot of mortality too. So to say, well, it doesn't seem that bad, I'll just get it, you really do need to discern. But, perhaps you shouldn't be so cavalier, and realize as well, as I said, when talking about the common good, talking about the effect our actions have on the life and health of others. It's not necessarily only about you as an individual. So I think you have to think about that very seriously. Okay, I did see somebody asked about safety. Okay, let me come back. I'm going to talk about the RNA vaccines, because I said a little while ago I'd try to come back to them, and then I want to take up an issue that several people asked about the NCBC's position compared to that of some other organizations. So what are these RNA vaccines, and why are they different? They are different. They are very new, although they've been under development for a long time. They hadn't gotten very far, but they didn't start working on them 8-9 months ago. There have been scientists working on them for a few decades. Okay, let's go back. Real basic biology here. The way that, again, most vaccines work is they put a little bit or a weakened form, a little bit of a weakened form of a virus in one's body. Now, our immune systems are really pretty impressive. When our immune systems find anything foreign, they isolate it, they attack it, they try to neutralize it. Our immune system doesn't like pretty much anything coming in from the outside. So of course, a standard vaccine puts a little bit of a virus in, a weakened form of a virus. The immune system identifies it, designs a response, attacks it, and then it's ready for the next thing. That's how the standard vaccines work. What makes the mRNA vaccine different? Let me mention 2 little concepts here. So the first one is, what are our cells doing while we're driving, or going to class or reading or eating or stuff like that? Turns out our cells are churning out proteins all the time. So one of the most important proteins that our body produces is hemoglobin, red blood cells, and they're taking oxygen all around our body, from our toes, to the tip of our head, especially our brain. Want to keep that oxygen in our brain. And they're churning out all these proteins to take the oxygen around. The way that this works is a little strand of messenger RNA goes into our nucleus, into the DNA. It picks up some instructions for making a protein, comes back out into the cell, and cell machinery makes a protein. Now that's happening all the time. So to think about these RNA vaccines, we have to put these 2 thoughts together. One, anything foreign in the body the immune system's going to identify it, begin to, react to it, design a plan, etc. And messenger RNA produces protein. So this is what these scientists have put together. I think all of you have seen some pictures of the coronavirus, and it's got all those spiky things on the outside. That's how it attaches to tissue. They said, instead of giving somebody the virus itself, let's just expose people to the protein in one of those spikes. Kind of an interesting idea. Not the whole virus, just the protein in the spike. And then what they did is they got the DNA sequence of that spike, and they are creating messenger RNA strands that they will shoot into you. The cells will take those things up and they will make just that protein spike. So they're using our own bodies and the machinery of the cells to create just a little part of that coronavirus. And then, of course, they want the immune system to identify it, attack it, gear up, etc. So when the real virus shows up, the body's ready. Okay, that's as simple as I could make it. It's fascinating technology. One advantage is you don't have to grow the whole virus in abortion-derived cell lines. You don't have to shoot the virus into people at all. In fact, they can produce these mRNA strands much faster than you could grow and produce a vaccine. So there are many advantages to it. It is brand new. Are there some safety questions? Absolutely. Although they are doing the safety testing. Do they understand everything about it? No, they don't. And I would say the experts realize that they don't understand everything about it, but they are relatively confident that they know what they're doing. They're getting the body to produce a protein. Of course, we've been giving people all kinds of vaccines now, well, for hundreds of years, certainly scores of years. You introduce something foreign, the body reacts to it, the body prepares for it, and it tends to work out for most people a very high percentage of the time. It is interesting, though, that Pfizer, which has one of these RNA vaccines, has identified effects on fertility and pregnancy and so on as a possible side effect. So anyway, I wanted to say that much. I know there are some questions about RNA vaccines. That's how they work. Yeah, they're new, no doubt. And actually, one of the questions was someone had asked, can I just wait for a while and see how it works out for other people? I think that's a valid strategy. Again, I think I said you have to discern about whether and when to get a vaccine. Now, the good news for those of us who don't want to be at the front of the line is that they have, I think it's about 80 million people that they intend to give the vaccine to before they open it up to the public. Those are healthcare workers, vulnerable populations, the elderly, people, in group living situations, and essential workers. And then after that, I think they would do the next level down, secondary workers. That comes to about 80 million people. So for months, I would say they will be working at producing enough of the vaccines and distributing them. And remember, I think all of these, certainly the 2 RNA ones, take 2 shots. So anyway, one could certainly wait, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. Okay, last little point I want to make. A couple people raised this question. There are some groups out there who are saying that any involvement at all with abortion-derived cell lines, any, is too much. So even the fact that the RNA vaccines don't use abortion-derived cell lines in manufacture, but use it in testing, that's too much. And then they wonder, had a couple people ask this, why does the NCBC say that these RNA vaccines are ethically uncontroversial? So, and we never have, is the thing. We have not said that at all. We recognize the controversy, and I've tried to represent where those vaccines stand. I think some of the confusion is that we have been using materials from the Charlotte Lozier Institute, and months ago, on May 6th, the Charlotte Lozier Institute issued a statement, and in that statement, they said that these RNA vaccines are ethically uncontroversial. I think that's when they simply looked at the manufacturing process. In the meantime, they have developed that chart. The chart is very well done. The chart is updated pretty regularly. It was just updated December the 3rd. And they clearly identify that there's, a red zone. There is something there that involves the use of abortion-derived cell lines. So I think a lot of us who are faithfully Catholic, who are very pro-life, recognize this is not an ideal situation at all. We wish we could avoid this, and we have to redouble our efforts to provide alternatives, although I think there's hope for the future. I really do. But it's just a matter, I guess, of how to emphasize or how to recognize that there's some controversy. Anyway, we recognize it. Some of the people whose names I've seen quoted, Debbie Van Edge and Stacy Transakos, I respect very much. Bishop Strickland of Texas, I respect him very much. And at the same time, I think we have to be very clear in our facts. We have to know the authority. We have to know the authoritative teachings of the church and represent those accurately, and then discern very carefully on sound principles and considerations after that. So, Mark, that's I've covered pretty much all the questions that people asked. So tell me what you want to do next.
Yeah, John, I have a question, and we do have a few minutes. If some people want to submit questions through the chat box, we can try to get to them. We have a couple there too that I'll mention. John, but you mentioned even monoclonal antibodies are created through abortion-derived cell lines?
Yes, some of the, I think they have to grow those.
So we know that when President Trump was diagnosed with COVID-19 and hospitalized, he received monoclonal antibody treatments. And I was just reading an article today or yesterday talking about the effectiveness of these treatments for COVID-19. So is that something we need to be aware of as well? It's not just a vaccination as a prophylaxis against getting COVID-19, but if we do get it and are hospitalized with it and are ill, we may be offered a monoclonal antibody treatment.
Yeah, that's correct. Now, monoclonal antibodies, and I don't want to get too deep into the biology or the chemistry or those kinds of things, but I think in a way that they are very targeted, therapeutic, and I can't remember the exact biological content. Probably my son's biology teacher will probably send me an assignment, but yeah, no, some of them are produced in quantity. Once you've created this therapeutic to produce it in quantity, you grow those things in cell lines. Now, again, not every single one is necessarily, but people have come to rely on these human abortion-derived cell lines in part because they're human, and they're not animal. Just a quick follow-up about that. One of the cell lines I put up in the list, PERC6, was created in 1995. And I actually had their marketing materials from around the year 2006 or 7. And they were marketing very heavily, you know, hey, this is a human cell, it's a retina cell, you know, from a human being, and you can be confident that it's pure, that it's well documented, and all these things. So they were marketing that, and it really bugged me. But there are reasons why these pharmaceutical companies want to keep all their manufacturing very pure, very consistent, very well documented. And so they either use or sometimes develop these abortion-derived cell lines so that they can meet those goals. The next thing I want to say, though, is there are some changes coming. RNA vaccines is one thing. Sanofi Pasteur, major, you know, one of the top 5 drug makers in the world, just bought a caterpillar cell technology for producing vaccines and things like that. They actually ended use of an abortion-derived cell line, MRC5, in one of their vaccines, and they took a couple others off the market. So I could see Sanofi moving into the caterpillar cell technology, and that may spread. In fact, Sanofi is one of the companies that is making a vaccine the traditional way, but using the caterpillar cells, a COVID vaccine. Now they're further behind in development. But yes, these abortion-derived cell lines have gotten into basic research, into vaccines, and even into other therapeutics, yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's fascinating. A couple, John, I don't know if you can see the chat screen, but there are a couple of other questions coming in there.
Yeah, let me put on my glasses real quick.
And there's another, while you're putting your glasses on, you can, if you want to close your screen share, we can see you.
Okay, yes, I will do that. Let me stop the share.
Also, someone was asking, if I understand the question properly, and I'll sort of summarize it. It's a question about secondhand knowledge that comes from the use of research using illicit, and I suppose it could be either fetal cells or human embryonic stem cells. But if there's an equivalency to using, taking advantage of the research that's used, that has made use of these cells to actually using the cells themselves, either you know, in a vaccine or in research in some sort of way. Does that make sense?
So the question is there a distinction between using the cells themselves versus using the knowledge gained by others or gained in the past? You know, this is why moral theology and healthcare ethics, you know, can be very complex. There are gradations, if you will, of good and evil. I would say in general, we should strive to obtain knowledge and develop tools, therapeutics, you name it, based on ethical means. Where people have done things unethically, you know, do we have to bury it, so to speak? I don't know if that's the case. I think we have to name it, though. We can never legitimize it. We might be able to learn something, but I guess we should try to confirm that by more ethical means. So yeah, it's a difficult question. A lot of times these issues creep up on you. In other words, and I think this is true for many people, these cell lines were underway, if you will, under use for probably a good 20 years before people began to pay much attention at all, you know, and it was only through the efforts of some very determined people that the issue got raised at all, and the Pontifical Academy for Life addressed it in 2005. So I would say that's another reason to keep banging this drum, if you will, to bring awareness to this question. I also think, you know, this virus has been terrible. However, it has brought attention to this issue in a way that most people have not paid attention before. Most people encounter vaccines, well, when they're children or they're busy parents. Occasionally we get things when we're older, but I guess we don't think to ask. This is raising the question, and I think that's important.
Great. There was a question also related to the mRNA vaccines, just further up the chat stream. I don't know if you can see it, but it was a natural law question asking the creation of this mRNA that's being inserted into our bodies is synthetic. And so is it in some way, can you see that question, John?
Well, I've got a long list in chat. So,
so let me just read it to you. And
yeah, go ahead.
So it says this new paradigm, our cells will be processors running inserted genetic code, essentially bypassing the instructions already provided in our God-given DNA. So are there any natural law concerns utilizing this mechanism?
Okay, yeah, and I did just find it as you read it. So we're using something synthetic. We are bypassing our DNA. I should note very quickly that the only function of messenger RNA is to carry instructions from inside the DNA, inside the nucleus out. So the mRNA carries nothing in. I know I've seen concerns out there that we might be changing our genome in some permanent way, changing our genetic makeup in some permanent way, and I don't think that's the case. You know, the short answer is there anything against natural law? I would say no. Think of the fact that we take vitamins, right? You know, we literally cannot produce ourselves just from eating all the minerals, the nutrients, and those kinds of things that we need. So it's good to create vitamin supplements. You know, I guess it would be good to have the natural food sources that would produce that, but that's not possible or convenient for everybody. So to use technology and go all the way back to Genesis, you know, God put man in the garden to tend and keep it, Genesis 2. God gave man dominion over the earth in Genesis 1. I would argue that's an ordered dominion, but it's a dominion nonetheless. So I think the short answer to that question is no.
Okay. And can you see the other questions there, John?
I see them. I'm trying to think of which order to go in. Okay, I see the latest one at 818. Why is AstraZeneca the only option? The employee may be asked to substitute Pfizer or Moderna as a religious accommodation. Well, the AstraZeneca, it could be used in the United States. Actually, I know a lot of governments around the world have ordered doses of AstraZeneca. It's going to be used, I would say, more in other places in the world than in the United States. So it's not the only option. The three that I put in the list are the three that have gotten the farthest to date. There certainly are others. Are there any all green companies? I don't know what that means. There is a John Paul II medical research company you would find in the list. They're located out in Iowa. I've not met the scientist behind them. He's been trying to create alternative cell lines to the abortion-derived ones for years. He's trying to create a vaccine that doesn't use them in any abortion-derived cell lines in any respect. But he has not even entered clinical trials at all yet. So theoretically, well, there are some companies out there. I actually looked on the list and saw at least 5 of the vaccines in production are not tied in any way to abortion-derived cell lines. However, one's in Russia, one's in China, one's in India, one's in Germany, and I can't remember. The other one might be in the United States, but they're all further back in the list. So, first you design it, then you go to what's called phase 1 trials, which test safety. Phase 2 trials test efficacy, and then phase 3, you tend to use bigger numbers and study people for a longer time. All this has been moved up, I would say expedited sufficiently. Let me see if I can take a question here real quick. What if your employer makes it a condition of employment to get vaccinated and the only option is AstraZeneca? Well, that's a good question. I mean, if you decide in conscience that it would be wrong for you to be connected in any way, let's just say to a vaccine manufactured, then you should refuse. You should always follow a morally certain judgment of your conscience, particularly when you say, if I do that, that's morally evil. And that's distinct from inconvenient, unpleasant, any number of things. If you discern that's morally evil, then you shouldn't do it, and you should follow your conscience. You may have to get another job. It's not out of the question. Of course, you should try to work out something else with your employer. But sometimes our ethical choices, cause us to forego other goods. It's certainly not out of the question. All right, let me read up the list and see what else I see. Okay, I saw another one. Okay, here's a question. Would it be unethical for Catholics to use AstraZeneca if they were provided in their state prior to other options? So I guess the question is, maybe New York State buys, I don't know, 30 million doses of AstraZeneca, and that's the only thing available. Would it be wrong to do? I think there's a good to using alternatives if possible. A number of other factors come into play. Do you need it? You're in the healthcare field, you need it to keep your job. You cannot wait. You might be a woman of childbearing age and you wouldn't want to take the Pfizer vaccine anyway. So you might end up using it under protest. The point I made is that the church does not forbid us to do this. It says we ought to use alternatives if possible, but it's not forbidden. So I would say it wouldn't be sinful. We should always try to do things as well as we can, but it wouldn't be sinful. And I guess I'm scrolling up. Okay, got a question. Are abortion-derived cell lines grown in a lab similar to HeLa cells? HeLa cells are spelled H-E-L-A, HeLa. Those cells are named after a woman named Henrietta Lacks, L-A-C-K-S, Henrietta Lacks. It's a fascinating story. She was a poor African-American woman who died of, I believe, ovarian cancer in the early 1950s. And a scientist took a biopsy from the cancer cells and began growing them in a lab. Now, cancer cells grow in an uncontrolled manner. It's one reason we don't want them growing in our body. And those cells, I would say they're different from normal human cells, but those HeLa cells were grown in a lab. They're still growing, and they've been used in many, many forms of research. I don't think they're used in any medications because they are cancer cells, but they certainly have been used. Now, that's an instructive example because in the late 1960s and 1970s, it was only then that the family became aware that the doctor had taken the biopsy without informed consent and had used the cells and published his results without ever telling the family. And over time, mainstream scientists and Johns Hopkins University, where this took place, have recognized that that was wrong. They have honored the memory of Henrietta Lacks They've named a whole building after her. And they have agreed that of course, they've not been doing this the same way anymore, but they sort of recommitted themselves to not doing such things anymore. I think we need a similar recognition by the mainstream scientific community that developing these abortion-derived cell lines was wrong. It should not have been done. We have to find a way to, in a sense, memorialize that and then not do it anymore. And I hope we can do that.
John, maybe one more question. Someone wrote in asking about women of childbearing age and these vaccines causing infertility, just to clarify that point before we close up.
Okay, now, all I know about that point, well, there are a couple of items out there in the media. There is a former Pfizer official, a guy who was a doctor and in one of their research departments, who has raised the alarm about this issue. Can't remember his name off the top of my head, but you can find it. He has raised these concerns, and Pfizer itself issued guidance to doctors in the United Kingdom, and I did just cut and paste text from that guidance. So there's a reason, because there's something about the chemical signature of the protein that the coronavirus has. There's something, in the DNA or RNA lettering that is similar between that coronavirus protein and a protein that I think has something to do with the formation of the placenta. Now that's total non-professional characterization of the issue. But I would say for any woman of childbearing age, she should look very carefully at either of the RNA vaccines and really try to get to the bottom of it. So anyway, that's about the best I can do.
Yeah, there's a website called clinicaltrials.gov, I think it is.
That's true.
Where you can look up all of the clinical trials. You have to wade through thousands of clinical trials, but it has a pretty good search feature. And you can look through and you can find out the admission criteria for individuals participating in these clinical studies and the exclusion criteria as well. And as Dr. Brehany has been saying, these were done pretty quickly. So every group has not been tested, and that includes young children, right? So
that's true, and they plan to not give any COVID-19 vaccine to children, probably for the foreseeable future.
There's a great question I think you need to address. It just came in about, and we're talking about voluntary abortion here, and we're talking about where these cell lines were derived, and often without consent. There's a question that came in about using the cells from a miscarried fetus or an so-called involuntary abortion.
Yeah, I'd say the challenge is that when scientists want these cell lines, well, for one thing, they don't want them from a miscarriage. They don't want them from a pregnancy in which something's gone wrong, right? Number one, they want them from healthy tissue. Second, they often are looking for a specific kind of tissue, even the sex of the baby. So Leonard Hayflick, when he was trying to develop a cell line, he would say, give me a male fetus, give me a female fetus. So there really was, he did, and others did, work hand in glove with people who were doing abortions to get what they wanted.
Great. All right, well, there are a lot of questions that I'm sure could just keep coming. It's really a fascinating subject. It's, this whole idea of protein synthesis that Dr. Brehany was talking about with the messenger RNA. If you want to see something incredibly fascinating, just go to YouTube and look up some of the video models of what's going on when these proteins are created, and realize that's going on in every cell of our body at every moment of our life. And it's just an astounding reality of what we're dealing with here when we're dealing with life, and especially who we are as human persons. And as we said at the beginning of this, there are so many challenges to human dignity that are coming to us through the development of various medical technologies. And I think experiences like this are so important for us to be able to have access to. And John, I want to thank you again so much for doing this. It's a very beneficial experience for us, I think, to be able to hear from you and to know the church's criteria and understand what's allowed and under what circumstances, and how each of us as Catholics ultimately has to resolve the issue in our own conscience with regard to what we're within the church's guidelines and the principle of cooperation that Dr. Brehany has stated, but just to make a prudential decision ourselves in our own conscience of what we're willing to do. Someone has written and asked if this presentation will be made available. It is being recorded. I have everyone's email addresses that have participated. So I'll be sending out a follow-up email to you all with a link to the recording. So you can watch it again if you wish to, or you feel free to share it with anyone that you'd like. And also, I think, John, I can also include the link to the document that is now, I suppose, published at the NCBC website that covers some of these areas that Dr. Brehany was mentioning tonight. So thank you all so much for doing this. We very much appreciate your participation. We didn't get all 600 and some, but at one point we were up around 350. So it's been an amazing response to this. And again, it's an issue that touches all of us in a very personal way. And all of us of good conscience want to make certain we're doing the right thing. So John, you've been a tremendous help. Thank you all. God bless you all. Thank you. Look us up at the Regina Academies if you don't know us. www.reginaacademies.org. There's also a donate button up there in the upper right-hand corner of the homepage of the website if anyone is feeling generous and wants to support our schools in some way. Also visit the NCBC's website at ncbcenter.org. And they have a wonderful consultation service for individuals. If you find yourselves in a questionable moral situation with regard to your healthcare, beginning of life issue, end of life issue, you can call, and 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They're there to respond to questions that are pressing. Don't call in the middle of the night unless it's really an urgent question, but they will take your calls any time of the day or night because sometimes those questions are urgent. So ncbcenter.org, tremendous resource for Catholics internationally. The NCBC serves everyone from various dicasteries of the Holy See to people like us who have questions about our own healthcare when we're in a dilemma of the best course of treatment. So thank you all again. God bless you all. And look for an email from me in the next day or two with a link to the recording and the document from the NCBC. All right. Thank you all. Thank you, John.
Good night.
Good night.